Nothing on the Bunnell Foundation's Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast should be considered medical advice. Medical advice can only come from your CF physician. Cystic fibrosis can be a devastating diagnosis, but living with the disease can bring positivity and a new appreciation for each day. From the Bunnell Foundation in Detroit, Michigan, it's the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast, sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical. Here's your host, Laura Bonnell.
Ashley Ballou-Bonnema is a wonderful young woman in her 30s who has cystic fibrosis. She shares her CF journey with us, and she talks about what life was like having a brother 7 years older with CF and what it did to her parents' marriage and to her mindset. And then she tells us about marrying her high school sweetheart. She is beautifully honest about the hardest part of cystic fibrosis, how it can take over your life, and she talks about the gifts, one of those being her foundation, Breathe Bravely. Ashley has had a great impact on me, and I'm so glad to know her. And now, you will too. Ashley Ballou-Bonnema, Giving Voice to CF. That's on your website, and we're so glad to be able to talk to you. We have met before, never in person, but you took part in our virtual event last year in 2020. So thank you again for that. And it's wonderful to see you again. I heard about you on CBS News this morning. Singing is everything to you. Is that right?
Yeah. And it means even more when I get to do so for organizations like your own, utilizing what I feel has given me most life in conjunction with the circumstance I've been born into.
So tell us a little bit. I always like to ask people their diagnosis story because either we can all relate or they're just uniquely interesting. So tell us how, your parents diagnosed you and how that started.
I actually had an older brother who was about 7 years older than I was. And he was born in 1981, which, back in those days, pre-screening and screening at birth was not a thing. And so people were usually diagnosed based upon failure to thrive or other complications. And he wasn't diagnosed until being about 7 years old. And so when I came along then, they just diagnosed me right away just because he had been diagnosed. But his first, 6 years of life before diagnosis were pretty traumatic because there was no diagnosis. There was no enzymes. There was no any sort of nutritional treatment. And so he just, honestly, it was that same idea of failure to thrive. And he'd actually been tested around 2 years old. The result was negative. And so then, they kept going to all of these different doctors to try and figure out what was wrong with him. Or, some were like, it's a type of allergy, celiac. It just ran the gamut of things. Mm-hmm. But nothing ever helped until, he was about 7 and went back to a specific clinic. And they said, let's test for CF again. And it was positive. So, those first early years and how important they are. And especially we know now, mm-hmm. How instrumental that early intervention is to your livelihood and lifespan with CF. So I came along and they just decided to test me right away. And so at a month old, I was diagnosed. And, it's something that I think about frequently and maybe why I have become so passionate about giving voice to CF and empowering others to give their voices to CF as well, is I know it's because of his diagnosis and the tragedy that essentially was his childhood that I was given a chance to live. So, if that hadn't occurred, we probably would have been in the same type of situation of that lack of early intervention and nutritional supplementation.
And what that did all those years mentally to him and to your parents, and then getting that diagnosis must have been like, finally.
Yeah, and the closest center that we had here for CF was about 7 to 8 hours away. It was in Iowa City, so where the University of Iowa is. And I remember growing up, my brother was so sick all the time that he very rarely was home. And so, it being that far away, my mom would usually stay there during the week. And my dad and I would drive back and forth, or I'd be left at my grandparents. Yeah, it's wild to think about now because it's so separated from me. It seems like a different life completely.
Mm-hmm.
But I simply cannot fathom being a parent like yourself and having that diagnosis and just maybe the life that you dreamed of for your children to suddenly be completely shifted. And not only are you responsible for, the joys and the betterment of your children, but their survival. And I think that's something that people are very privileged not to have to think about if you have a child with no chronic illness or any complications. And I can tell you, CF in many senses destroyed my family. And it caused a horrific divorce between my parents. And it affected me in a lot of ways, watching my brother suffer that way. My childhood was primarily my mom would get off work. I would get home from school. You would get in the car. At that point, then here in Sioux Falls, there finally was a CF clinic. And that was about 40 minutes away from where we lived. So we would get in the car, drive at night up to see my brother and stay with him in the hospital until about 10 o'clock at night. And then we would make the drive back home. And just seeing how merciless CF is and how devastating CF can be, it affected me a great deal of how I dealt with my own CF and how I made the conscious choice to A, run from it, and also B, hide it. Because I didn't want to be the cause of pain for my parents, even more so than they had already endured. I knew they couldn't handle it, or I couldn't handle seeing them or putting them through that. So yeah, it was, and I think about that a lot of especially the end moments of my brother's life and thinking about just my own disease progression and where it's at and what's happening to me. And you can't help but kind of replay that.
Absolutely.
That in your mind.
And I think that's really hard for siblings that both have CF. One is either sicker than the other. And then you have the in common things that you could talk about. But your story definitely, I get what you're saying. Very difficult to watch and then see your parents, and there's guilt everywhere from them to you and you to them and your brother to you and your brother to your parents. And it's very sad. And thank you for sharing that. How long was he able to live with cystic fibrosis?
Sure. So he died when he was 17.
Wow.
So I was about 10. And again, like looking back at it now, and I think we do something that people with CF are really great at, and their families is, I think now more than ever we say this, how resilient and adaptable we are through the hardest of times and the best of times. Looking back at that now and kind of how separated I am from it, it's part of what has shaped me and created my story, but it feels like a different life. It feels like a different time and place that it's hard to imagine even being amidst that anymore.
As horrible as that was, like you said, it did make you who you are and gave you strength and propelled you into what you're doing now. Because our story is who we are.
Exactly.
And gets us going to where we're going. So you are growing up with CF and everything that you just told us about. Are you thinking about your future now, about what you want to do for a career or getting married? Take us to that mindset as you're growing and after your brother has passed away, and then how life goes moving forward.
I still maybe think a little bit of this way, that I never planned too far ahead. And especially, growing up, seeing what a disease can do to somebody and how unfair, and always kind of having this ticking time bomb in the back of my mind that I could feel, that I could hear, and trying to maybe hide it from everybody that it's, I'm cool, calm, and collected. I'm going to live forever. CF doesn't even exist in my mind. And I'm mentally stronger than CF. It cannot touch me. I will just run faster. Which you and I both know, Laura, like that doesn't, that's not how CF works.
Right.
But in our mind, we think it does. So I, like I said, I hid it from everyone. I grew up in a very small town and a small rural community where everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody's story. And people knew that I had CF, but nobody really knew what CF is. They knew that I had a brother with CF, but that's about the extent of it. And, like CF is such an invisible illness that my brother looked sick. He was malnourished, right? His growth was stunted from an early age. But looking back, I had a very CF body of like sticky legs and, more of a barrel chest and, kind of like bird-like arms. But, is that an awkward middle schooler or is there something else going on?
Right.
So, I could blend in pretty easily. And that's the way I liked it, is that just kind of nobody knew. As for thinking about the future, I think I have always been very present within the here and now, worried that I would never be given the opportunity to have a future, regardless if I was doing my best to outrun CF. And just thinking in your mind, with every birthday, with every passing year, you're running out of time. And so I met my husband. We started dating when I was 15, which sounds crazy. I teach people who are 15 and I'm like, what are you doing? No. And he was 18. And so we are high school sweethearts. I always say that we met that young because we may not have the chance to live a life together for as many years as other people might, having met somebody when they're older. So we just had to start our life sooner, I guess, than most people probably would advocate for. And we've been married, 12 years. And been together almost 18.
Wow.
So that has been one of the greatest gifts in my life. And I can honestly tell you, CF has affected our relationship so much. When we first started dating in high school, he knew very little about my life with CF. And, I did my best for those people who did know to keep them at arm's length, not getting too close to let them really know how CF was affecting me.
Absolutely. And because your brother was 7 years younger, your friends weren't probably as much aware that he had CF or that he died from CF.
Well, and he was never, in the school that we went to, he was in the hospital, 49 weeks out of a year. So when he was home, he maybe would go to school 1 or 2 days and then, be homeschooled for the rest of the time and be back in the hospital. So it wasn't even like he was around and present, even with his classmates. So Gotcha. It was just kind of this, everybody knew that there was this person or, that this happened, but connecting it to me then as well was a totally different thing. So yeah, as thinking about a future and what you're capable of doing, I moved forward step by step rather than looking 10 yards ahead of me and not watching where I was stepping or being present with every step. So I always felt like, for better or for worse, that life would come at me in the way in which it needed to. And it has, and it truly did. I was placed somehow where I needed to be at that given time to make me feel like I could take that step. And that was, graduating high school, going to college. In the city that I live in now, there's a private university here. And I had started, taking voice lessons while I was in high school at this university. And so it was just a little bit of an easy transition then to just formally start my studies there.
So right now you must be in your early 30s, correct?
Yep, 34.
34, okay.
Which seems crazy.
No, it doesn't seem crazy. It seems like you're so in tune with yourself and with CF, and you have so much wisdom in your young self. I really hear all of your wisdom, and I think it's just beautiful. And that's what I wanted to ask you, which is exactly what you were talking about, is when you brought music into your life.
Yeah, what is crazy is that, being able to look back, seeing how music has always been, for lack of better words, instrumental in my life. And I think, during the most difficult and traumatic times and tumultuous times in my life, music was always my solace or an escape. And I didn't know it at that point, that it was a saving grace to me in my life with CF. When my dad and I would drive back and forth from Iowa City, and my mom would be still at the hospital with my brother. My dad loves music. And so he would play every possible 80s song on that long drive. And that became like my soundtrack to my life. And my dad would always talk about how, I would have actions to every single word. I would sing along. So we built this city from Jefferson Starship, I feel like is my foundation for my musical upbringing, which I think at some point was like rated the worst rock song ever. I like to differ, but, and so just through my childhood, it was always, instead of watching cartoons, my dad would turn on MTV. And back in that day, it was just music video after music video after music video. And so I would just sit in front of the TV and dance and sing and, make up choreography to these music videos. And also one special thing that I was just recently thinking about, when my brother would be home and he would be feeling okay, we would go down into our basement together. And imagine, early 90s has like the old track lighting and
nice.
the big stereo system and the speakers that we would put in a CD, and somebody would be over controlling the lights, and we would have like a dance party, or we would be like lip syncing and putting on these shows for each other. If it got really crazy, we would get the flashlight out and there would be like a strobe light.
Wow.
So, thinking about like those kind of memories that we would share together, amidst all of the horror and all of the heartache and the devastation of CF, thinking about those moments and how those also really still stick with me. When my husband's at work and I work from home, just a few days ago, I turn on, Spotify, and it's a lip sync dance party with myself when I feel like I need to retreat from the world and I need to retreat from CF.
I don't know how we would all live without music. I mean, it inspires us. It's our timeline. It uplifts us, or we find a song that fits our mood at the moment. It is just wonderful to hear your musical story.
And it connects us so much to our story ourselves and our lives. And, I love how music, you can hear something and you can put yourself in a time and place, and just stirs up all of that emotion, or makes you think about people, or makes you feel uplifted and happy and better. In our program now, I always tell people, like, even if you don't feel like singing, make yourself sing for 10 minutes. Turn on the radio, turn on your favorite song, just sing. Because not only does it do something for us with CF, physically, brings awareness and a depth of breath to our respiratory system, but emotionally and mentally, it changes us.
Tell me now, when you decided to start this website, Breathe Bravely, and how you built that and what it has become.
It's still very unfathomable to me, thinking about where we kind of began in that initial thought of this and what it's become. I always say I do my best to just reflect the good that has been poured into my life by other people, and hope to just continue to extend that to others so that they might feel the same. I'd mentioned I spent a great deal of my life hiding CF. So when I went to college, my undergraduate, very few people knew that I had CF. I had one professor that knew that I had CF, and it was my voice teacher, because I never wanted to be measured at a different level than my peers, especially as a musician who wants to hire a musician that can't breathe or has a disease that's debilitating, and people might find you unreliable and untrustworthy. And so I wanted to be measured on the same scale as everybody else. I wanted to be seen for myself and not for a disease that I had no control over. So, I hid that. I thought I was running faster than CF. But we all know CF comes knocking, and in the most opportune times and ways. So I got through my undergraduate, and I remember doing my degree recital in my undergrad, getting done and thinking, if I don't keep singing, I'm going to die. And that sounds very dramatic as like a 20-some-year-old, but I know it was something so much deeper, and I would have professors ask me, like, what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this degree? Because I did not get an education degree for teaching in a school.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just say, I'm not sure, but I know I need to do this. And that's not a great answer for professors or your parents who are paying for an education for you. But it's that same thing that I deep down knew that I couldn't live without music, but at that time maybe didn't allow myself to see why. So I got done with school, worked for a few years, taught, and then had this feeling that I needed to go back to graduate school and I needed to continue to do this. And CF still rearing its ugly head and progressing at an alarming rate, in which I was doing my best to just suppress even more so, which just made it worse and more angry, let's say. And went back to grad school, had no intention of telling anybody about this. Mm-hmm. But the first week, I ended up on IVs, and I ended up having to tell one of my professors.
And you can hide that too, but you didn't, because you could hide your PICC line, right? With the sleep.
Yeah. But I was cornered a little bit about not auditioning for a show that they had expected me to audition for. So I just kept saying, I can't. And, there was some like, well, this was kind of expected of you. This is why you were let in this program. And so then having to be like, to pull up my like shirt and show them like, this is why I can't. Which is, again, one of the most like awful feelings, to just wrestle with yourself and show that vulnerability, but also feel defeated before you even start. And as a disappointment, not only to yourself, but to somebody you respect. Mm-hmm. I remember, then again, tamp it down, don't tell anybody, push ahead, show everybody else, whether they knew you had CF or not, how strong you are, how driven you are, how passionate you are. And I remember we have things called juries in conservatory, mm-hmm. where it's at the end of the semester, you go up and you perform for your faculty and you get a grade, and they see your progress and they get to ask you kind of whatever they want to ask you. And I got done thinking and feeling, take that, CF. I just showed you that you will never be stronger than me. Mm-hmm. And it was 10 minutes later that I was in the bathroom having one of the most devastating hemoptysis episodes I've ever had in my life to this date. Just coughing up blood after blood after blood, sinkfuls, feeling it like just at that rock bottom feeling of like, why can't you let me have this? Why can't you just let me live? Let me live the life I want to live. And, wrestling with, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to tell everybody because I think they need to call an ambulance.
Yeah, there is nothing scarier, I don't think, than that in CF.
Absolutely not. And I know hemoptysis is still something that I deal with quite a bit. And I would say probably on a weekly basis. And, I know they're like, it's CF to an extent, that's going to be normal. You're going to cough up some blood, but it will never be normal for me to feel that and see that. That's not where blood is supposed to come from, right?
Right.
And then, it just makes it worse because your adrenaline starts pumping and you start thinking, oh my God, what if this doesn't stop? What's going to happen? Thankfully, in that moment, it did stop after about 20 minutes, but I had to walk back out of the bathroom and go back into that performance hall. And everybody was like, where were you? Like, we were looking for you. Are you okay? Like, what's going on? And I had to tell them. And so I had to tell all of them.
Okay, so I want to cry hearing you say this. So I know you held it together, right? Because you had to, but how in that moment did you get through that?
I was more angry, right? And more not angry at anybody particular, but angry at CF. And angry that I just want to do this. I just want to live. And why do you have to make it so hard? Why do you need to make my CF everybody else's CF? Right? Like, why can't I keep it hidden? Why can't we just deal with this? But instead, CF is this hypothetical person or thing has to literally bleed onto everybody else. And then again, all of that kind of like past trauma as a child kind of boils up.
Right.
And the last thing, and I'm sure your daughters are the exact same way, the last thing any of us ever want is pity.
Exactly.
So don't pity me. I'm going to show you I am just as strong. I've been dealing this for how long? And I would still not tell you if this hadn't, been precipitated by this episode.
And I have to tell you, just in a relating manner. So we're coming out of the pandemic slowly. Obviously, we're still not there. And my 23-year-old, Emily, starts coughing up blood. So she kind of felt the same thing. Are you kidding me? We're coming out of a pandemic. I'm fully vaccinated. And now I have hemoptysis.
Now this.
It's yes.
And it's just crushing. And it's a reminder that you have no control.
Right.
You can do everything right. You can think that you're mentally strong, but at the end of the day, CF, regardless of what we do or how strong we think we are, for individuals like us, we still are subservient to a disease that wants to ruin our life, whether that's the name of the game or not.
Right. And I know it's made you strong, and I know it's made my girl strong, but there are other ways to get strong, right? We could just bypass all of this. And then you all had to do it in a pandemic, right. On top of the isolation. Now you're more isolated. And
even thinking about the stress of a pandemic as well, about like, okay, I'm coughing up blood, but I don't want to go to the ER. Okay, because what am I going to find there? Is it going to be an emergency room full of people with COVID? Okay, how, and I've had some during the pandemic as well, had some episodes that I'm like, oh, okay, like this might be cutting it close of like having to, make that call to go to the emergency room, or what's going to be worse, me waiting it out or me getting exposed to COVID.
And in the midst of all of this, you're still teaching voice lessons, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So how that all kind of started, I was getting very obviously more and more sick. And I had friends that would reach out to me and say, like, we know what's going on. We know something is going on. Like, let us in. Let us be there for you. Let us help you through this. And I'd be like, nope, I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about. I got this covered. You don't need to worry about anything. And, I'd go into the hospital, or I'd have, months on end of home IVs, and none of them would know about any of it. And again, just having those core supportive, unrelenting people in your life. It was April, so we're kind of coming up on when it all happened. April in 2014, I had some friends that were just persistent about, let us into your life. Like, we love you and we care about you and we want to be there. It's not fair for you to decide this for us. And so I woke up on April 1st and wrote a blog. And it was just supposed to be for my friends and family. It was kind of me just exposing the entirety of my life and what CF really is and how it affects my life. But I wanted to be very strategic in how I did it. Mm-hmm. That when people read it, it wasn't about, oh, okay, this is what CF is. Poor Ashley. Oh, this is terrible. This is so sad. I wanted at the end of every single entry for people to feel that they could relate with that. That just because I have something that's called CF, that doesn't mean that how I feel or how I experience life is any different. The sadness we all feel, the heartache we all feel, the joy we all feel still feels the same regardless of what you call it. Mm-hmm. So yours might be this type of obstacle and yours might be this obstacle.
Or COVID.
Yeah. The true thing we are all seeking is empathy. And I think sometimes we forget that empathy comes through a similarity, not of experience, but of feeling. Mm-hmm. And so I had no idea kind of where that would lead. And so I blogged straight for 60 days. And looking back now, while I was like finishing that second semester of graduate school and blogging it every single day, like it's not an easy thing to just sit down and do it. And I don't know, there was a lot of sleep lost during that time. And I was also on IV antibiotics again, so it's just, but it needed to be done. And I think it was an eye opener, not only for myself, but for maybe my community in my life. Just airing of who I am truly as a person and how people can be a part of each other's lives, but still be independent and strong. So after that, in November of that year, I had a pretty significant run-in with CF. Just again, continuing to progress, continuing to be unruly and unfair. And I had sinus surgery, I had a bronch done. My body did not take well to that. And I always say, like, I can do really well staying on top of CF or thinking that I can stay on top of CF if my adrenaline never drops. And so that's why I'm always like, I got to do this and I got to do this as long as I stay ahead of it. And in that case, I felt like CF definitely caught up with me. I usually would sit, my baseline would be about 46% to, maybe 48, 50 if I'm really, really lucky.
Are you talking about pulmonary function?
Yeah, yep, lung function. And so it went from my baseline, well, it kept dropping and dropping, and I was at like 35%. And things got so bad that I was transferred from my hospital here in Sioux Falls up to U of M up in Minneapolis. And I was set at 25%. And so having the transplant team come in and talk to me about, like, okay, this is moving quickly. We need to make a decision. We need to get the ball rolling on this because this continued to go the wrong way. And we don't have time to talk about this. And I think that was maybe one of the most devastating feelings in my life, that I had absolutely no control.
Mm-hmm.
My mind was still in grad school. My mind was still thinking about what I thought I was capable of doing. So my mind is running at 200 miles an hour and my body is running at 2 miles an hour. And just how devastated I felt in that. I kept thinking, like, why can't you just be stronger than this? Why can't you just, tell your body that you don't have time for this? You are stronger than CF. And again, having those people come in and have those difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, we all know that that's kind of the path of CF, right? We
Right.
continue to decline. It's a progressive disease. But in your mind, you have it mapped out, theoretically.
You have a plan. Doesn't always go that way, but right.
Yes. Even if it's not like this is going to happen and this is going to happen, theoretically in the future, I know this is going to possibly be a conversation. I will be ready then. But when then becomes now, it feels like your entire world is just completely pulled from within you and from under you. And it's just that reminder of how unfair CF is. And then seeing that devastation, not only from within yourself, but my husband, thinking about my parents, thinking about, I had just kind of aired myself to the world of what really CF is. Looking back now, I'm like, okay, that all laid out pretty well for itself because I had exposed this life that I truly had and how I felt. So when this happened, I don't want to say it was easy, but it felt like the right thing to do and what I needed as well to be able to share that aspect of my life as well as that was happening.
You let people in on your story. They understood to some extent, much more, it sounds like, than they had before.
Yeah. And so thankfully, that is not where my path went. I worked incredibly hard, and I appreciate my team so much here and at the U of M, who truly saved my life or gave me the life back that I had hoped for. I maybe stubbornly went back to graduate school, but, still dealing with incredibly low lung function. And at the end of your degree, you have to give a degree recital again. And it was maybe finally 3 weeks before that date was set, that I could finally sing again. And I can tell you when we were having the conversations about having to have a lung transplant and moving very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't necessarily going through that trauma and that difficulty. It was the possibility of not being able to sing in the foreseeable future or ever. based upon if there's damage that happens to your vocal folds. And that still makes me like kind of choke up, just feeling that devastation of doing that in which you feel has given you life. So yeah, gratefully I did begin to sing again and could sing even with the lungs I had. And I remember that moment of stepping onto the stage for the final performance of my graduate career and getting done and walking back on the stage and thinking, oh my God, I did it. And thinking in that same respect, like I will always be stronger than CF, regardless of how brutal, how unfair, how devastating it can be. And I think not only myself, but everybody in that room knew at that moment that singing had saved my life. So graduate school ends. A dear friend of mine, I'm sitting in her kitchen and she says, now what? And I remember saying to her, I want other people with CF to know the life-giving power of singing in their own lives. And not only how it made me so aware of my respiratory system of, something was slightly off. I would call my team and say, I could sing 3 measures yesterday and today I can only sing 2. So, and I'm sure I imagine them listening to that and being like, this girl's crazy. But then, getting to know really quickly that I was so in tune with what was happening with my body that we could catch exacerbations sooner than when they completely exploded and there were all of these other signs.
It was a good measurement.
Yeah, exactly. Using it as kind of a barometer. And also having this feeling that I owned my breath and CF didn't own my breath, that I was in control of it. And there's this, I would say 99% of the population never truly learns how to breathe. We just do it. And so the very thing that CF dares to steal from us, if I can help other individuals feel as if they're utilizing every beautiful breath, every ounce, every expanse that they can have, how is that going to change not only maybe the length of their life, but the quality of their life? And so feeling like they have that strength within themselves.
And you start Breathe Bravely.
Yeah.
And not everyone can sing. And I'm sure not everyone with CF can sing, right?
And I think that was maybe the misnomer, right? That people going into this program. So Breathe Bravely became a nonprofit then. And we started in 2017 our program with 5 students. And I had, at that time, my closest and most entrusted colleagues that are also musicians with me, but also voice instructors. I sat them down, and 2 of them specifically, and said, I have this idea, but I need your help because I can't be in the same room as other individuals with CF. And I thought they would be like, oh, okay, that seems a little crazy. Because I'm like, I need to translate to you what I feel and what benefits me, but I need you to teach it to them.
Right. And for anyone who doesn't know, we of course know, but it's the bacteria that you can't pass between your CF lungs and someone else, because if you have certain bacteria, you could infect someone else with it.
Yeah, that's never been exposed, and that might be a bad bug for them, and vice versa. But if you live in the same household, they're not usually worried about siblings because you have this unsafe environment.
Right.
But I thought my friends and these brilliant instructors would be like, thanks, but pass. And they were like, let's do it. So as we got talking more and more, we have a CF center here. I thought, well, okay, we have CF people around then in our city. It came to be that we live in a very rural area. And so most people traveled into the city for clinic, and we had very few actual people within the city. And so that's when we had a few people say to us, like, why don't you try it via Zoom? And remember, this is 2017 when people knew what FaceTime was and like Skype. But Zoom was a foreign concept. And as an instructor, teaching that way, oh my gosh, like that seems crazy because there's this huge delay and there will always be a delay. So what you hear is always a second behind when I'm actually saying it. And so we figured it out. Everybody would always hear a beat later than where we're at. So we can never do anything together. Well, when I teach in studio here, when I teach my students, like I can accompany them. We can do things in real time. So I came to my instructors. At that time, I had 5 instructors. So I had started with our 5 instructors and said to them, "Hi, we're going to move this onto Zoom." And I thought they'd be like, "Okay, we signed up to do this, but no way, no way." And I kind of went through the challenges that we were going to face with this, but also the positives of what can come of this. And amazingly, they all were like, "Let's do it. We'll figure it out as we go." And it truly has been absolutely remarkable. So starting in 2017 in February, we started with our first 5 students.
Do you have a story about one person that you've noticed, wow, this really helped them? Somebody who has CF?
I can give you a list. And I think that's the most amazing thing is when we first started as well, I had assumed it would be a lot of, teenage individuals just because you're a parent, okay, I have a child that's interested in this. Oh my gosh, they have CF. I want to do anything and everything I possibly can to better them. Right.
Right.
And right now we have 37 students a part of the program from all over the world. And 5 of them are under the age of 20. The rest of them are all adults. And, we have people who have 25% lung function.
Amazing.
We have people who have, 30, 40, people who have over 100% lung function. And that they learn that it's not about the breath that you have in your lungs, it's what you do with it. That brings life to music, brings life to their voice, and makes you feel most alive. And so having one individual, this has been multiple people, but just one quick story is an individual. We started just with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? Because it's all about giving you the tools to utilize to sing a song. So we spend a lot of time on breath work, breath exercises, that expansion, that awareness. And then we learn how we add our voice to it. That singing is letting and not making. So with CF as well, we're fighting a lot of complications. We maybe think that we can't sing. I would beg to differ that everybody can sing. It's just, we haven't learned how to utilize the tools to do so. And so this specific individual had, very, very low lung function. And so working with that person for 10 weeks, just to sing the first phrase of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to a point that they didn't feel breathless, that they trusted their voice, that they trusted their breath. And by the time that we got to the end of those 10 weeks and they sang through the entirety of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and to see that person's look on their face is a priceless moment I will always remember, because it was just this overwhelming feeling of, I did it. I am stronger than CF. I own every breath, and it doesn't own me.
And that's beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. And if someone's interested in taking classes through your nonprofit, what do they do? Do they pay for the class, or is it a grant, or how does that work?
So it's living with CF, and this, Laura, but CF is not a cheap disease. It's costly in many ways. And I never want anybody that maybe isn't a singer, maybe doesn't feel like, okay, I have the money to just invest in this, but I don't really know about it, and how it's going to benefit me. I realized how beneficial this is, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. It's a catalyst for connection and empowerment within yourself. So it's so important to me that anybody who wants to do this program doesn't have to make that choice of whether or not they can take on that financial burden. So it's through private fundraising. It's through the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. We have grants through them, some other grants as well that we've been given, that we continue to provide this at no cost to individuals. And so we always say your first 10 weeks is absolutely free. Then you can get an invitation to continue on if you feel like, okay, you're really finding benefit with this. It's really giving you life in so many respects. And so we haven't had to ask for any payment, gratefully. And again, that's something that's so important to me. So I hope that we continue to be able to do that, that anybody who wants to take part in lessons can do so. So to sign up, what happens is people go to our website, breathebravely.org, and then there's a Singspire link. And so you can fill out a form there. And yeah, so we kind of go from there. Every session, we open up 5 new spots. This last year, because of COVID, gratefully, we had the means to open more spots just because I saw it as such a needed thing in our community. And we had people who wanted to do it. So I never want to turn anybody away.
What a beautiful thing that you're able to do. And anybody listening, if they've got a few extra bucks, it's a great place to donate. And it is on our podcast in the information. So if people want to go to that link, they can definitely donate to you. And while we wrap it up, I saw a recent post. You're vaccinated for COVID-19. And that was a beautiful post with the daffodils. What do you want to say? Is there anything we didn't talk about as we're wrapping up this podcast?
Yeah, I don't know. This has been such a wonderful experience to chat with you, Laura. Honestly, and being able to do things like this always makes me kind of revisit where we've come. And again, taking our life and the experiences that we've had, good and bad and hard, if we allow our life's truth and our life's passion to intersect, I promise that is where you will find your life's purpose. And that purpose has allowed me to meet people like you, Laura. And that's one of the greatest gifts that I will ever be given. And I hope I can continue to just reflect that back out into our community.
And me, you. I mean, you're such a gift. I mean, it's definitely mutual. It's just wonderful. We just open up our lives and are inspired by so many people. It's fabulous to know you and to see all that you're doing and the impact that it's having on so many people. So thank you for being part of this podcast.
Thank you, Laura. It means a lot.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, check them out online at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, the science of possibility, and produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts.